Joe. Welcome back to Anco.
Glad to be back in a new set.
Yeah, we moved. We're still in the yard office, but we're on our weird couch, our weird bumpy couch, but it creates separation, which is nice.
Yeah, and it's very comfortable.
It is.
It's amazing no wine has been spilled on it yet. Couch with that kind of shape and that kind of color, it's asking for it.
Well, CNU is coming up, and I assume someone's going to spill something on this couch during CNU in Strong Towns.
We'll be lucky if it's just wine.
So you too can sit on this couch if you're a new urbanist. May
Or strong towner.
15th, or Strong Towner, May 13th. Daniella has joined us, Daniella Beltran, All-Star Planning Lead at Yard & Company.
Welcome.
Yeah,
Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. It's like you're on our talk show. I guess you kind of are. So I wanted to spend some time on this episode of Anco talking about the first 16 feet, which is something that at Yard we've kind of been working on internally as a way to think about our urban design, placemaking, planning strategies, and even how we engage the community, what we engage them about. I'm going to kick it to Joe to just sort of describe the first 16 feet. I was trying to remember where it started. It was probably something that we bounced around to each other along for a while, but I think we sort of started to bring it to life in this Walnut Hills project, the Kroger project with Personality of Place and so on. Is that how you remember it?
Yeah, I think so. Most directly. Like you said, it's been kicking around in all of our brains in the studio here for years. But really with the Walnut Hills redevelopment of the Kroger project, that's really when we, I think, all got together and formalized the Personality of Place.
And for those who don't know, Walnut Hills is a neighborhood in Cincinnati.
Yep, just up the hill from downtown.
Closed grocery store right in the heart of a business district, and our job was to engage the neighborhood and design a master site plan for the developer who was doing a mixed-use development on the site.
And Personality of Place is probably a subject of a future Anco.
They're connected, but yeah, it's a separate.
And so but a quick background on that essentially is a way of talking about the future of the place in a way that both kind of sophisticated stakeholders or investors as well as everyday citizens who can close their eyes and imagine the future of how a place feels. It became our process for kind of teasing that out and then yielding actionable guidance for development and growth. And at its core, it had traits like any good personality. And what I think came out of that was this understanding that those traits are most readily felt when you're walking down the street and kind of experiencing, smelling, listening to the place that you're inhabiting. And that whether it's a quiet personality or a more boisterous one, that is most readily experienced in what has become called the first 16 feet. And as the name suggests, the first 16 feet is the first 16 feet up from the sidewalk on a building, and the first 16 feet out from the building into the public realm. And it's that magical zone, and those numbers are obviously fungible, but it's kind of born out of the traditional height of a storefront or a first floor residence set up 3 or 4 feet from the street. So that it is born in some kind of precedent, but that zone is the real kind of magic of first 16 feet. And I think it's based in this notion that every building has something to offer the street, and every street has something to offer the building. And where those two zones collide is really its own environment. And that's what we're really nerding out today about.
Yeah, and you recently presented this to a class that I'm co-teaching at the University of Cincinnati, and so I'm glad we explained it because we got about halfway through your presentation in the class, and then one of the students raised their hand and said, "Excuse me, sir, what is the first 16 feet?" So you forgot to explain it.
Well, I thought their instructor had maybe teed it up.
No, that's why you were there. I think going to the Walnut Hills project, I think one of the reasons, the ways I remember thinking it was useful, and this applies to multiple neighborhoods, but that neighborhood in particular had already had a lot of conversations about housing and form of buildings and density, and so we really wanted to kind of take that out of the conversation and really focus on really great design for the ground floor, which is often the case in neighborhoods where you end up going down the rabbit hole of talking about housing affordability or other elements that become the one thing you spend 90% of your dialogue on, and then what gets forgotten is this experience of actually walking by the building once
Yeah.
it's built.
That's right.
And I think with those conversations, that does, like, you know, when we frame it as like focusing on the first 16 feet, I think it is important as a way to direct conversations so that they are kind of setting up a win situation for both sides, like community members, businesses, and developers. Because I think through that project and just others, that's really a good thing for negotiations of like focusing attention, getting that realm right, makes a better product on the development side in their role to bring in really good retailers or whatever that commercial use is. And then of course, for just the pedestrians walking by, that's usually a forgotten thing, that if it's not brought up, that's an easy thing that becomes a sterile environment if it's not focused on.
Right.
Yeah, and it's amazing, just to pick on architects for a little bit, although we love them,
That's a later episode.
is how much work is designed from the sky down. And we run out of interest, time, money, energy by the time we get to the most important part of the place. And so I think what really separates kind of human-centered design versus not is thinking about it from the human experience up. And that's, when we're setting out to work or when architects that we're working with are designing buildings within that environment, it's the area we spend the most time thinking about and where we're spending the most energy and money and investment on getting the details right.
So you were just in a APA, National Conference, and you gave a presentation on First 16 Feet. And before I get to that, you were in Minneapolis for that. I've never been. I believe you called it the Seattle of the Midwest.
Yeah. Well,
Tell us about the city experience of bouncing around when you weren't in sessions and whatnot.
Yeah, I went in on Friday morning and was able, flew in, and from the airport was able to easily hop on their light rail to get into downtown. So quickly noticed, and then that same ticket I was able to use later in the day to ride the bus. So I think from a transit perspective, I was able to see how that was working really well. And then after dropping bags off, I was able to go find a bike shop where I could rent a bike and then really quickly hop on these really awesome trails that connect they've got these chain of lakes that are only a few miles from downtown. And it covers this pretty big area, and that's really just where it lucked out. It was really nice weather, so a ton of people were out using the bike trails kind of in the water. Kids, it was warm enough for them to get in.
Wow.
There's some
for
spots,
They're
but
a
it
hardier
was,
bunch.
70
Yeah.
degrees. That's like summer. That is.
Yeah, true.
So really good, starting to be really good retail along there too. And then also kind of adjacent to the lakes, there's this really great Midtown Greenway, which is the sunken former rail line that they, I think decades ago, converted to pretty big east-west bike boulevard. So that was a great facility, and then that connected you to the other side of a long river and trail system. So
Wow.
they had great mix of bike infrastructure that was used, I think, a lot by all types of commuters just for fun, and so that was kind of
like
a
30
really
miles
great
in or something?
intro. I did 27 miles.
Now, it seems like you didn't go to the actual conference. Talk about that.
That was my Saturday, Sunday, Monday. So
So you APA sounds like it was fun.
yeah.
What kind of reaction did you get to the first 60 feet? Any good questions pop in?
Yeah, I think, APA is a traditionally it's the planning where there's a lot of credits and all kinds of planners. It is geared toward more public sector planners, so the first 16 feet, being a little bit more on an urban design topic. I think having that discussion was really great to see that offering is not in abundance at these conferences, so I think that was interesting to notice that there was a really good appetite for this type of conversation. I think people were just really interested of like, just this was something kind of new, and I think part of the presentation was also referencing the fact that I mentioned, nature is a really great place to learn from, and we did find that there's this kind of phenomenon of this first 16 feet space that we talk about that is, does exist in nature, where we found that there's this ecotone space in nature where two habitats, instead of just like butting up against one another, there is this like other realm where it serves as that transition buffer. So it's kind of cool to be able to reference this thing in nature that is what we're trying to help replicate and talk about. So I think it was received really well, and I think this is something, the way that public investment can sort of have some opinion around, I think is something that they were eager to learn more about.
Nice. Yeah, and I mean, on the public sector side, it's interesting to think about that audience in the first 16 feet. We've recently worked in a city where, as part of our kind of usage of first 16 feet, helped to develop regulations and a zoning code around that. You want to talk about that, Joe? Like, that seems like a good way for a city to think about, how do you regulate for this? How do you smartly create incentives for it and things of that nature?
Right. Well, and like so much of our kind of public sector work, it starts with a challenge or a problem that a city or a district is facing. And in this city that we're working in, its problem was kind of the exodus of retail downtown following the pandemic, partly. But also their existing zoning code essentially required ground floor retail on every single building front in the entire downtown. So to the extent that there was retail energy, it was dissipated and not focused on any one street. Even their traditional main street in the heart of downtown was struggling from that. And that was, just to kind of link that to the first 16 feet in terms of why it's important for a second. Oftentimes planners resort to retail being the only thing that creates an active street.
Really, and zoning too. I mean, just retail or no retail.
Right, yeah, it's really binary. And what we're really careful to communicate in the first 16 feet is that retail is but one condition by which a pleasurable walk or an active sidewalk or pedestrian experience can feel like. And the 16 feet has in it all of these ingredients that can be mixed in a variety of ways. Some that trend to be more residential, some that trend to be more passive, some that tend to be just quiet, reflective spaces versus active ones like retail. Some are more dining oriented if they are retail versus more like mercantile or shopping driven. And so, it's not just a one-trick pony. So anyway, I say that because a lot of cities jumped into this mode of thinking where if we just require the developer to deliver ground floor retail, we'll have the walkable downtown that we wanted. Mm-hmm. And what we've seen in not just this city, but across the country, is the unintended consequence of that is harder to get approved development, sure, but then when we do get the retail square footage on the ground floor, it either sits vacant because the demand hasn't been figured out or it's the wrong format of retail, or if it's a residential builder, it's sitting behind frosted glass and it's the gym, or at best case scenario, the leasing office or something like that.
Whatever. Yeah.
So bringing that full circle back to why cities are calling us like this one around using the first 16 feet to remedy their ground floor experience in a downtown, we've been able to take this kit of parts that comprise the first 16 feet and start to identify critical streets and corridors where we're going to be most adamant that retail goes, and make sure that we're developing these concentrated, kind of non-negotiable retail experiences downtown. But then think about all the other streets, not as some lesser version of a retail street, but different types of active streets. So we're maybe getting quieter connecting streets or more residential streets. In some cases, streets that are more back of house or servicing and loading, and being a little smarter about how we regulate that. And then when we do regulate it, rather than kind of getting lost in the myriad of things that we need to think about, we really focus the regulation on that zone that matters, and getting the dimensions and the relationships right within the first 16 feet.
Yeah, we always talk about transparency and eyes on the street, not putting brick walls up on streets, but in many ways a vacant storefront is as bad as a brick wall when you start overloading the retail, and that just becomes that binary choice, and then you're hit with frosted glass or just vacancy. Just makes it feel just dead, unsafe.
Right.
The other, just thinking through how we've started to bake in this thinking into almost all of our work, but another interesting project is in Kalamazoo, where we worked with the downtown BID, essentially the downtown management group, and started centering all of their operations, programming, events, grants, marketing, et cetera, around the first 16 feet too. So it's sort of about, in the same example you're mentioning around smarter regulations, like matching up with a smart operator too, because a lot of it is operational stuff that is in the public realm or close to the public realm.
Well, it's a signaling device too. You're providing clarity to the developer marketplace when they're doing site selection. If I'm a multifamily developer, I'm going to look at a map in a downtown. If I want to be in that downtown, which a lot of downtowns are trying to attract residential right now, they can be very intentional about what street or block makes the most sense for them. Whereas when you require retail everywhere, you're forcing certain developers to go through hoops that they'd rather not. So it's a really problematic starting point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's a good way to add a bit of nuance, but that is still predictable. It is setting up others to participate in what your vision is for your district.
Well, and to link it back to personality, it's interesting to think about regulation of the first 16 feet, and there are certain kind of patterns or dimensional criteria that we know from our work are successful. But going back to the personality notion, this is also where the culture and the vibrancy and the personality of, say, the shop owner or the resident or the business comes out to the street. And so there's a real danger to over-regulate, don't you think, this stuff? Because this is where you kind of want to have it be pretty kinetic and dynamic and kind of challenge all the senses. And this is another place.
And adaptable.
Yeah, and keep it flexible to the changing needs of the market or the retailer or the resident or the whatever. And I think it's really important to keep that in mind, because how many places have we been where every single bay of the building is kind of treated as the same thing with different words on it, and you don't get any of that texture and vitality or that sense of memory of this place because it's kind of put behind this screen of uniformity. So I think that's another place that as developers and architects and designers we can get a lot better at, is acknowledging the limits of our work, and when the creativity of the shop owner or the brand or if it's a residential stoop, for instance, their own take on the world can express itself back to the street, kind of going back to the idea of the gift back to the street.
Yeah, we were in Oklahoma City recently, and we were talking a little bit about first 16 feet. And there was a guy on our committee that owned a bar, and it was kind of like a small retail hall with retail on either side, and then a bar in the middle. But one of the bigger spaces was up against the street, and one of the challenges of this district was lack of street life. And he had a cafe in the front that was struggling, and we went through the deck of kind of different first 16 feet treatments of storefronts, and his big takeaway was this idea of immediately cutting a hole out and creating a walk-up window, which would give his business and building more visibility, activate the street, and also help the cafe survive, because people weren't getting the signal to come in the door. It has really great street trees in this district. The street trees kind of hiding the building and hiding his signage, and we needed to bring the life of the storefront out to the curb. And so he's already kind of working on that, which is cool.
I was just noticing on the way home yesterday that Maze right here on the corner has a really great walk-up window and sidewalk counter scene going on. And now that the weather is what it is, you're seeing the kind of flourishing of the first 16 feet's coming back alive.
Yeah, I think kind of the underlying, all the elements that make a good first 16 feet environment are just really about getting people to slow down as they walk by or pay attention to what's going on and just have reasons to kind of linger and hang out. I think that's kind of what the signage, the seating, whether it's a public or private use, they all have, I think that's when they work well is when they're providing that.
Yeah, it's amazing what it does to the sense of safety and kind of belonging and being looked after. Mm-hmm. It does require, though, maintenance and
operations.
How many times have we been to these places where the plants have folded over on themselves or the railing is falling off?
Nothing worse when a flower pot's turned into a place for cigarettes. That's what I was thinking the other day. That's a sign. You need a first 16 feet manager. If you have more cigarettes in your planter than flowers.
Yeah.
Well, and Lane on our team told me that we should have drank 16-ounce beers during this and called it the first 16 ounces. Joe is contributing a little bit to that.
First 12 of the 16.
First 12, but we can do better next time. I also think one of the more badass things about it is we've started to call it F-16, which sounds like a Top Gun, like airplane. So that's been fun.
Well, you mentioned, I was just going to add to, this is different from where you're going.
Oh, you're going in a different direction?
I was going to go back to, you mentioned 16 feet vertically. It's really good storefront height. It's flexible for a lot of different, whatever that ground floor user is. But I was just going to add on the horizontal side, I think it works really well too of typically 8 feet is your really comfortable, ideal sidewalk width for an active area. And then 8 feet is that, depending on the street setup, usually that's your
Mm-hmm.
curbside use, so that could be either on-street parking or maybe streetery. So just I think that dimension works really well for being able to be flexible about how that horizontal space gets used.
Absolutely. One thing that's it's a bit of scope creep on the first 16 feet, but we were at East Walnut Hills, is it Rusk, a couple weeks ago, or a couple days ago. And
good for 16 feet.
What I really enjoy about that street is, while a lot of people think it's a multiple-story mixed-use street, and it is, there's a lot of great one-story buildings.
Mm-hmm. And two-story.
Yeah, and a lot of Main Street America is actually one-story buildings. And so the first 16 feet gives credence to the value of those, but what I like, or what is the scope creep on this, is the rooftops of these are starting to be developed, and so you almost get this kind of visible top to the first 16 feet that's becoming active one level up and kind of stretching the influence of the first 16 feet even beyond that core zone, but still contributing to it.
I sense a new term coming.
F16 plus.
The top 4 feet.
It's like Apple Plus.
Yeah.
F16 plus.
Yeah,
it's a higher subscription level.
Streaming service for the F16. All right, any final first 16 feet thoughts? Let's wrap this up. It's Friday. We have work to do. Joe has beer to drink. Nothing. Final thoughts. We'll drop some links in the show notes of the Kalamazoo work and the Walnut Hills work.
I don't know how it syncs up with the timing, but Ed and Lane are talking about the first 16 feet in Birmingham coming up.
Oh yeah, good point. Promotion. Yeah, we should promote that. We're going to Ed and Lane from our team are going to Main Street America's National Conference, May 7th, 8th, in there, giving a session on the first 16 feet. Are we talking about anywhere else?
I feel like the rest of the summer is just folks trying to live up to the bar that Daniella has set, which appropriately is 16 feet high.
Yeah. Good one.
The other thing I would just kind of tease out there, it's more on all of us, is that you mentioned the deck, the first 16 feet deck. We're in the middle of...
we can share that too.
No, where I was going is something a little different.
Okay.
It's not shareable yet.
Oh, it's not shareable.
No,
okay.
We are in the process though of building a new kind of handbook or pattern book for the first 16 feet.
Oh, gotcha.
That's why it's not ready yet. It's a summer project that will be ready.
But I
by
do
the
think
end
it's
of
also
That'll be
good
useful.
at like, as a concept to put out there, and like the more we talk about it, the more people add their experience into it, which makes it stronger.
I've been told that once you see the first 16 feet, you can't unsee it.
It's true.
I think that was Olga's boyfriend's comment in Chicago. They just go around and that's all they talk about now.
Yeah, you're essentially kind of ruining people's experiences.
And in that case, their relationship.
In that sense, it's sort of like when we walk around with our wives, this might be the same for you. Like you walk around with your friends or whoever, and you're like constantly talking about the place, and it just ruins the experience for everyone.
I don't do that. Do you do that?
Where you
I used
judge
to do it.
good
I've
and
gotten
bad
better,
ones.
and then my Anna made me stop doing it. But yeah, once you see it, then it's like it's distracting you.
Yeah.
All right, good.
Good place to end.
Great job, guys.
Yeah. Have
See
a
you
good
next
weekend.
time.
Yeah.
Let's get to work.
All right.
Sounds good.